Death is not the opposite of life, it is part of it. What if everything you were ever taught about death was designed to make you afraid? Not to protect you, but to control you. Here is what physics, biology, and honest thinking reveal. Death is not the destruction of existence, it is a transformation of state. The atoms in your body right now were forged inside dying stars billions of years ago. You are not a human being who will one day cease. You are the universe, briefly experiencing itself in a particular arrangement. When that arrangement ends, nothing is lost. Energy does not disappear. Matter does not vanish. The carbon in your bones will become soil, trees, oceans, and eventually new stars. You were never truly born in a permanent sense, and you will never truly die in a final sense. The fear of death is therefore a misunderstanding, a philosophical error dressed up as instinct. Understanding what death actually is, at a fundamental scientific level, dissolves the terror more completely than any prayer or comfort ever could. You did not exist before birth, and that was fine. What if you already survived non-existence once, and you didn't suffer at all? Before you were born, there was no you to experience darkness, loneliness, or fear. There was simply nothing. No pain, no awareness of absence, no suffering. The state of non-existence before your birth was identical to what will follow after your death, a complete absence of experience, which by definition cannot be bad. The ancient philosopher Epicurus understood this with brutal clarity. Death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not present. When death is present, we no longer exist. This is not poetry. This is logic. You have already been through infinite non-existence before your first breath, and you felt absolutely nothing because there was no you to feel. The fear of death is really a fear of losing what you currently have, not a rational fear of what comes after. That distinction changes everything about how you choose to live right now. Uncertainty is not weakness, it is scientific honesty. What if admitting, I don't know what happens after death, was actually the most intellectually courageous and freeing thing you could say? Most of humanity's suffering around death comes not from death itself, but from the desperate, anxious need for certainty in a universe that offers none. Religions, rituals, philosophies, many exist primarily to fill that uncomfortable gap with answers that feel solid but remain fundamentally unverifiable. Science does something different. Science says, I don't know, and that's where curiosity begins. Not knowing what happens after death is not a threat. It is an invitation to live fully, to question deeply, to wonder without agenda. The greatest scientific minds in history, the ones who genuinely moved our understanding of reality forward, shared one trait. They were comfortable sitting inside uncertainty without forcing false resolution. The moment you stop needing death to have a comfortable answer, you stop being afraid of the question. The universe owes you nothing, and that is magnificent. What if the fact that you exist at all, against all mathematical probability, is so astonishing that the idea of fearing its end becomes almost absurd? The probability of you existing with your specific DNA, your specific parents meeting, every ancestor in your line surviving long enough to reproduce across billions of years of cosmic chance is so astronomically small that it borders on the impossible. And yet here you are, thinking, feeling, reading these words. The universe had no obligation to produce you. No cosmic law demanded your consciousness. No force owed you a life. And because of that, because your existence is fundamentally a miracle of improbability, every moment you have is not something being slowly taken from you. It is something impossibly extravagantly given. Death in this frame is not a theft. It is the natural closing of a gift that was never guaranteed. Fear transforms into gratitude. Panic transforms into wonder. Fearing death means wasting life. What if your fear of death has been quietly killing your life, one avoided risk, one unlived dream, one swallowed truth at a time? This is the most practically devastating consequence of death anxiety. It doesn't save you from death. Death comes regardless, but fear does successfully prevent you from living. Every person who never started the business, never said I love you first, never moved to the city, never wrote the book, never had the difficult conversation, most of them were not stopped by lack of ability. They were stopped by a quiet background terror that catastrophized the future. The irony is grotesque. In trying to protect yourself from the pain of ending, you end yourself early, emotionally, creatively, intellectually. You become a cautious, diminished version of a person who once had fire. The cure is not recklessness. It is the clear-eyed recognition that the risk of not living is infinitely greater than the risk of living fully and dying naturally. Consciousness is a temporary arrangement, not an eternal entitlement. What if your sense of self, That voice in your head you call I is not a permanent soul but a magnificent temporary pattern of electrical signals. Neuroscience is unambiguous. Consciousness is produced by brain activity. When the brain changes through sleep, anesthesia, injury, consciousness changes or disappears entirely. Under general anesthesia, you do not dream, you do not fear, you do not experience the passage of time. You simply aren't there, and then you are again. Death, at a neurological level, is anesthesia that doesn't reverse. That is not a horror, that is just the honest description of a natural process. The you that fears death is itself a construction, neurons firing in patterns that create the feeling of a continuous self. That construction is breathtakingly beautiful. It is also impermanent. And impermanence is not a flaw in the design. Impermanence is the design. Cherry blossoms are not less beautiful because they fall. What if I told you that the thing you fear most, the thing that wakes you in the dark hours of the night, the thing that makes certain thoughts feel too heavy to finish, is built almost entirely on a misunderstanding? Not a small misunderstanding, a fundamental one. I want to talk about death, not poetically, not comfortingly, honestly, with the same ruthless, joyful curiosity I'd bring to any problem worth solving, because death is worth solving, or at least worth looking at directly, without flinching. Let me start with something physical, because I find physics has a way of saying things more truthfully than almost anything else. The atoms in your left hand right now, the carbon, the oxygen, the hydrogen, they have been part of stars. Literally. Stars that exploded billions of years ago, scattered their material across the galaxy, and that material eventually found its way into you. You are, in the most literal and non-poetic sense, made of star remnants. The universe assembled you out of ancient cosmic debris, ran a brief, spectacular experiment in consciousness, and will one day, gently, inevitably disassemble you back into its original components. Nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, only rearranged. So when someone says death is the end, I want to ask, the end of what exactly? The pattern, yes. The particular arrangement, absolutely. But the stuff goes on forever. Now, some people find that cold. I find it astonishing. But let's go deeper, because the physics is just the beginning. Here's a thought experiment that I think cuts through all the anxiety more cleanly than anything else. Where were you in 1000 BC? Nowhere. You didn't exist. There was no you to experience that absence. No suffering, no darkness, no waiting in some cosmic holding room, impatient to be born. Just nothing. Not even the experience of nothing, because experience requires a subject, and there was no subject. Now ask yourself honestly, was that bad? Of course not. It couldn't be bad. There was no one for it to be bad for. And here is the point that logic delivers with complete, unambiguous clarity. The state after your death is identical to the state before your birth. You have already been through infinite non-existence, and it cost you nothing, because it cost no one, because there was no one. Epicurus figured this out without a single piece of modern neuroscience, which tells you something important. This isn't a new idea. It's an obvious one that we keep burying under anxiety. But I want to be honest about something, because I have no interest in false comfort. I don't know what happens after death. Neither do you. Neither does anyone. And here is what I've found, that uncertainty, which most people experience as terrifying, is actually, if you sit with it long enough, beautiful. The universe is not obligated to be comprehensible. It is not required to provide us with satisfying answers. It existed for 13.8 billion years before we showed up asking questions, and it will continue for trillions of years after we stop. The honest position is, I don't know, and I refuse to pretend otherwise just because the not knowing is uncomfortable. But here's what I do know. With every instrument available to me, the probability of you existing is essentially zero. Go back through your family tree, not just parents and grandparents, but thousands of generations. Every single ancestor had to survive long enough to reproduce. Every meeting, every survival, every coincidence in an unbroken chain stretching back billions of years to single-celled organisms in ancient oceans. All of it had to happen exactly as it did, or you specifically would not be here. The odds against you are incalculable, and yet here you are, conscious, curious, capable of asking the very question the universe seems to be asking through you. That's not nothing. That is by any reasonable measure the most extraordinary thing I can think of. And then, and this is where I want you to really pay attention, we spend that extraordinary, improbable, cosmically unrepeatable existence afraid of its ending. shrinking from risk, swallowing the truth we should be saying, not starting the thing we should be building, not loving the people we should be loving fully without reservation, because we're quietly terrified of eventual loss. The fear of death doesn't save you from death. It just saves you from life. And that, scientifically, philosophically, practically, is the worst trade available to any conscious being. Now let me say something about consciousness itself, because I think it matters enormously here. The you that is afraid right now, that voice, that sense of continuous self, that feeling of being a permanent thing moving through time, is a pattern. A magnificent, complex, breathtaking pattern of neurons firing in coordinated rhythms inside 3 pounds of wet biological tissue. When you go under general anesthesia, that pattern temporarily stops. You do not dream. You do not experience the passage of time. You are, for all functional purposes, not there. And then the anesthesia lifts. The pattern restarts, and you are back. Death is anesthesia that doesn't reverse. Not a punishment, not a void of horror. Just the pattern stops. The river keeps flowing. But this particular eddy, this specific temporary swirl in the current, smooths out. Impermanence is not a defect, it is the mechanism. Cherry blossoms are celebrated because they fall. The sunset is magnificent because it ends. The value of a thing is not diminished by its finitude. It is, in almost every case, defined by it. Your life is precious not despite the fact that it ends, but in a very real and important way, because it does. So what do we do with this? We stop rehearsing endings. We start showing up fully to the scene that is actually playing. We take the risk. We say the thing, we build the thing, we go to the place. We love extravagantly and without the exhausting self-protective holding back that fear demands. We live like people who understand, really understand, that they received a gift of absurd improbability, and that the only rational, worthy, honest response to such a gift is to use it completely. Death is not the enemy, unlived life is. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. It is under no obligation to provide comfort, continuity, or cosmic justice. And yet somehow it produced beings capable of asking why, beings capable of standing at the edge of the unknown and choosing curiosity over terror. That is you. You are the universe's way of looking at itself, questioning itself, marveling at itself. And that will have been true, permanently, unchangeably true, regardless of how long the pattern runs. You are here, you thought, you wondered, you lived. Nothing that comes after can undo that. So stop fearing the closing page and start writing the most extraordinary sentences you're capable of, right now, today, with the time that is undeniably, beautifully, irrevocably yours. What if the thing you fear most, death, is something you have already survived once, completely, without any suffering whatsoever? Before you were born, you did not exist. There was no darkness you endured, no waiting, no fear, just nothing, not even the awareness of nothing. And it was fine. Now here's the question that should stop you completely. If non-existence before birth caused you zero suffering, why would non-existence after death be any different? I've spent a long time thinking about this, not to comfort myself with pretty ideas, but to actually look at it with honesty, with physics, with logic, without flinching. And what I found completely dismantled the fear. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly why death, understood correctly, is not the thing you should be afraid of. And what you actually should be afraid of is something far more immediate, far more preventable, and happening to most people right now. Stay. This one matters.